In 1977, an Oldsmobile owner popped the hood of his brand new Cutlass Supreme and just stared. The air cleaners said Rocket 350. The fenders said Oldsmobile. The badge on the grille said tradition, torque, and decades of engineering pride. But the block casting numbers told a different story. It wasn't an Oldsmobile engine at all. It was a Chevrolet. That moment, a simple hood pop in a dealership parking lot, would trigger lawsuits, federal investigations, and one of the most embarrassing brand crises in General Motors history. Because the Oldsmobile 350 Rocket wasn't just another small block V8. It was identity. It was marketing. It was heritage. And what happened next changed everything. Most people think this was just a simple parts bin swap, a harmless corporate decision. But the real story is deeper, technical, political, and a little bit desperate. You think you know this story? Not like this. To understand how GM lost control of the Oldsmobile 350 Rocket, you have to go back to 1968. The muscle car wars were at full throttle. Gas was cheap. Insurance companies hadn't started their crackdown yet. And cubic inches ruled the world. Detroit was building engines like there was no tomorrow. Pontiac had the GTO. Chevrolet had the Chevelle SS. Plymouth had the Roadrunner. Ford had the Torino. Every manufacturer, every division, was in an arms race measured in horsepower and torque. Oldsmobile's answer to that world was the Rocket 350. On paper, it sounded almost ordinary. A 4.057-inch bore, a 3.385-inch stroke, displacement, 350 cubic inches or 5.7 liters. Cast iron block, cast iron heads, 2-valve pushrod design, but the details mattered. Unlike Chevrolet's small block, the Olds 350 had larger 2.00-inch intake valves in high-performance trims. It used a heavier, more rigid block casting with thicker main webs. The oiling system fed the lifter galleries first, then the crank, a design that worked fine for street use but limited extreme RPM durability compared to some race-oriented rivals. The block itself weighed about 575 pounds fully dressed, making it one of the beefier small blocks of the era. Engineers at Lansing had designed it with durability in mind, not just peak performance. This was an engine meant to last 100,000 miles in a family sedan, not just survive a quarter-mile pass. In base form, compression ratios hovered around 8.5 to 1 by the early 70s. But earlier high-compression versions? 10.5:1 and higher. In 1968, the Rocket 350 in the 442 made 325 horsepower gross. Torque peaked around 360 lb-ft. That wasn't just respectable. It was muscle. Drop that into an Oldsmobile Cutlass, and you had quarter-mile times in the low 14ths. Around 100 miles per hour at the traps. For a mid-sized street car with power steering and a radio. Car magazines of the era praised it for smooth power delivery and strong mid-range punch. It wasn't the wildest engine on the street, but it was refined, sophisticated. The kind of performance you could use every day without feeling like you were wrestling a race car. And Oldsmobile marketed it hard. They called it the Rocket for a reason. The name traced back decades, all the way to Oldsmobile's original overhead valve V8 in 1949. That engine had revolutionized the industry. It made Oldsmobile synonymous with performance and innovation. The Rocket badge wasn't just marketing fluff. It was generational pride. But there was a problem. By 1971, everything changed. The Clean Air Act loomed. Unleaded fuel was coming. Compression ratios had to drop. Overnight, 10.5:1 became 8.0:1. Horsepower ratings shifted from gross to net. A 325 horsepower engine suddenly looked like 180 on paper. The difference wasn't all real. Gross ratings measured the engine on a stand with no accessories, while net ratings included the alternator, power steering pump, air cleaner, and exhaust system. But the psychological impact was devastating. Customers felt betrayed, and then the insurance company stepped in. By 1973, insuring a high-performance V8 could cost thousands of dollars per year in today's money. Young buyers disappeared. Gas prices spiked after the OPEC embargo. Lines formed at gas stations. Rationing became reality. And suddenly, efficiency mattered more than quarter-mile times. The muscle car era didn't just fade. It crashed and burned almost overnight. General Motors panicked. See, GM wasn't one company in practice. It was 5 major divisions: Chevrolet, Pontiac, Buick, Oldsmobile, Cadillac, each with its own engines, its own engineering teams, its own pride. Each division had operated almost like an independent manufacturer for decades. They competed with each other nearly as much as they competed with Ford or Chrysler. That meant 5 different 350 cubic inch V8s, 5 different castings, 5 different machining lines, 5 separate supply chains, 5 sets of tooling, 5 engineering staffs defending their designs. The inefficiency was staggering. For a corporation facing rising costs, new emissions regulations, and plummeting sales, this was no longer sustainable. And in a world of shrinking sales and rising costs, that was madness. So corporate made a decision. They would standardize. In 1976 and 1977, GM began quietly installing Chevrolet 350 small blocks into Oldsmobiles when Olds factories couldn't meet demand. The Chevy 350 had a 4.00-inch bore and 3.48-inch stroke. It made similar power in smog-era trim, around 170 to 185 net horsepower, roughly 270 lb-ft of torque. The logic seemed sound. Both engines displaced 350 cubic inches. Both made about the same power after emissions control strangled them. Both used pushrods and 2 valves per cylinder. On a spec sheet, they looked nearly identical. On paper, the numbers were close. In reality, the engines were completely different. Different block architecture, different motor mount locations, different head bolt angles. Even the distributor rotation was opposite. The Oldsmobile turned clockwise. The Chevrolet turned counterclockwise. The bell housing bolt patterns were different. The oil filter locations differed. The timing cover designs weren't interchangeable. These weren't variations of the same engine. They were completely separate designs that just happened to displace the same volume. Oldsmobile loyalists knew their engines. And then came the Cutlass. By 1977, the Oldsmobile Cutlass was America's best-selling car. Over 632,000 units that year alone. It outsold everything. The Ford LTD, the Chevrolet Chevelle, the Toyota Corolla, everything. Demand for the 350 V8 was massive. Oldsmobile's Lansing engine plant couldn't keep up. Production capacity was maxed out. Waiting lists were growing. Dealers were screaming for inventory. So GM filled the gap with Chevrolet-built 350s. No badge change, no disclosure, just a small 5A in the VIN that most buyers never noticed or understood. The window sticker still said 350 V8. The brochures still showed the rocket badge. Sales staff had no idea they were selling cars with Chevrolet engines. Even dealership mechanics were sometimes surprised when they opened the hood for the first service. At first, almost nobody noticed. But then owners started comparing notes. Some complained their engines didn't feel the same. Others found different carburetors under the air cleaner. The Oldsmobile engine typically used Rochester Quadrajet 4 barrels in certain applications, but the mounting was different. Mechanics realized the intake manifold bolt pattern wasn't Oldsmobile at all. Enthusiast magazines started running comparison articles. Word spread through car clubs. The automotive grapevine lit up. And then the lawsuits began. Customers argued false advertising. They paid for a Rocket 350. They got something else. Even if performance was similar, the brand promise wasn't. People didn't buy Oldsmobiles to get Chevrolet parts. That was the entire point of stepping up from a Chevy. You paid more for something different, something better, or at least something distinct. One class action lawsuit in 1977 claimed GM deliberately misled buyers. The case went to federal court. Media coverage exploded. Consumer advocacy groups piled on. This wasn't just about engines anymore. It became a symbol of corporate arrogance, of Detroit's disconnect from its customers. And here's where it gets interesting. GM argued that 350 cubic inches was 350 cubic inches. They never explicitly promised a specific engine casting in every car. The badge referred to displacement, not origin. Technically, the performance was equivalent. The reliability was comparable. The customer received what they paid for in terms of actual functionality. Technically, they were right. But emotionally, they were losing. Most people don't realize how much brand loyalty mattered in the 70s. An Oldsmobile buyer wasn't just buying transportation. They were buying refinement over Chevrolet. Engineering distinction. A step up the ladder. Social status. The driveway told your neighbors where you stood. A Cutlass Supreme said you'd made it further than the guy with a Malibu. Maybe not as far as the Cadillac owner, but you were climbing. And suddenly, that ladder felt fake. Under the pressure of lawsuits and public backlash, GM settled. They offered partial rebates to affected owners. Estimates vary, but the settlement cost millions. Some owners received several $100s. Others got extended warranties. The exact terms varied by jurisdiction and specific claim. But the financial cost was just the beginning. But the damage was bigger than the payout. Behind the scenes, engineers were furious. Oldsmobile's 350 wasn't perfect. By 1977, it ran around 8.0:1 compression. Output had fallen to roughly 170 net horsepower in many trims. But it had unique casting patterns, different main journal sizing, and a reputation for smooth torque delivery. Engineers had spent years refining the combustion chamber design, optimizing the intake runner lengths, tuning the camshaft profiles for Oldsmobile's specific customer base. Chevrolet's small block was lighter and cheaper to produce. Its block casting was more compact. It had decades of production scale behind it. From a pure manufacturing standpoint, it made sense. The accountants could show clear cost savings. The production planners could demonstrate improved efficiency. Corporate saw numbers. Engineers saw identity. And then the real nightmare started. Because this wasn't just about Oldsmobile. By the early 1980s, GM accelerated engine sharing across all divisions. Buick V6s showed up in Pontiacs. Chevrolet engines appeared in Cadillacs. The famous Cadillac V8-6-4 disaster happened partly because engineering resources were stretched thin across too many shared projects. Corporate rationalization became policy. The divisions that had once operated like competing kingdoms were being merged into interchangeable parts suppliers. In 1981, GM officially ended production of the Oldsmobile 350 Rocket V8. Tooling was repurposed. Castings were phased out. The Lansing plant shifted focus. After nearly 2 decades of evolution, the Rocket 350 was gone. The last engines rolled off the line with little fanfare. No special commemorative editions. No final celebration. Just a quiet end to a lineage that stretched back to the dawn of the overhead valve era. Not killed by a rival. Not destroyed in racing. But replaced from within. Think about that. An engine that once powered 442 muscle cars with 360 lb-ft of torque, reduced to a line item in a corporate cost analysis. An engine that had won races, set records, and built a brand's reputation, canceled because it was redundant. You can probably guess what happened next. Oldsmobile's brand identity began to blur. Sales stayed strong through the early 80s, but something intangible had changed. Buyers couldn't clearly define what made an Oldsmobile unique anymore. Was it the styling? Some models looked like rebadged Chevrolets. Was it the interior? Parts bin sharing meant the same switches and gauges appeared across divisions. Was it the engineering? Not when the engines and transmissions were identical. By the 1990s, the division struggled to differentiate itself from Chevrolet and Pontiac. Engines were shared. Platforms were shared. Interiors looked similar. The Aurora was supposed to revive the brand with unique engineering, but it was too little, too late. The intrigue confused buyers. The Alero was just another compact sedan in a crowded market. And in 2004, Oldsmobile shut down completely. Now, was the Rocket 350 swap the sole reason? Of course not, but it was a turning point. It signaled that GM's divisions were no longer sacred engineering kingdoms. They were interchangeable. The decision to swap engines without disclosure showed that corporate management viewed the brands as mere marketing labels slapped on fundamentally identical products. And once that became obvious to consumers, the premium pricing became impossible to justify. From a technical standpoint, the irony is almost cruel. The Chevrolet 350 would go on to become one of the most successful V8 engines in history, produced from 1967 into the 2000s in various forms. Used in trucks, Corvettes, Camaros, millions built. It powered everything from economy sedans to performance icons. It became the default V8 for hot rodders and engine swappers. Even today, decades after production ended, it remains one of the most popular engines for custom builds. But for Oldsmobile loyalists, that wasn't the point. The Rocket 350 wasn't about ultimate horsepower. By the late 70s, 170 net horsepower and a 2-barrel carburetor weren't winning drag races. Quarter-mile times had slipped into the mid-16-second range. 0 to 60 took over 9 seconds in most applications. This wasn't performance by any modern standard. It was about trust. When customers opened that hood, they expected a specific block, a specific casting number, a piece of lancing iron that traced its lineage back to the high-compression muscle era. They expected the engine that Oldsmobile had spent millions advertising, the engine that had built the brand's reputation. Instead, they found corporate consolidation. And that's how GM lost control of the Oldsmobile 350 rocket. Not in a fiery engine failure, not with bearings spun at 7,000 revolutions per minute, but in a boardroom balancing production capacity charts. The decision probably took 30 minutes. A presentation showing cost savings. A discussion about production efficiency. A vote. Done. The specifications tell one story. A 4.057-inch bore. A 3.385-inch stroke. 350 cubic inches of cast iron Americana. Compression ratios that fell from 10.5 to 1 to barely 8.0 to 1 as emissions laws tightened. Horsepower that dropped from 325 gross to 170 net in less than a decade. An engine that started the 70s as a muscle car power plant and ended the decade as a smog-choked economy V8. But the emotional numbers tell another. Over 600,000 Cutlasses sold in a single year. Millions of dollars in legal settlements. And eventually, one entire brand erased from the American road. A century-old nameplate reduced to nostalgia and fading memories. So what's the lesson? Sometimes, losing control doesn't happen when something explodes. It happens when something gets standardized. When the engineers lose to the accountants. When 350 cubic inches stops meaning heritage and starts meaning inventory. When the unique becomes the redundant. When the distinctive becomes the interchangeable. The Oldsmobile 350 rocket didn't die because it was weak. It died because it was unique. And in an era obsessed with efficiency, uniqueness became a liability. Corporate efficiency demanded standardization. Cost reduction required parts sharing. Profitability meant killing the distinct in favor of the universal. That's what makes this story so wild. An engine that once symbolized independence ended up proving that within GM, independence was already gone. The Rocket 350 was supposed to represent Oldsmobile's engineering prowess. Instead, its replacement showed that Oldsmobile engineering no longer mattered. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most overlooked turning points in automotive history, let me know in the comments what story you want next. Another engine scandal? Another corporate betrayal? Or a forgotten piece of racing history? Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Because sometimes, the most dramatic failures don't happen on the track. They happen under the hood, where nobody expects them.